Okay, so what do you need?
I need milk. Lots of milk.
He needs some milk!
Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Dismal in Disguise. In this episode, we're going to be covering how to turn a simple circular piece of cardboard into something like this. A decorated, fully detailed piece of tainted necromantic scatter terrain. I really enjoyed making these pieces, and overall they turned out really well. They weren't that difficult to create, and I was able to make a sizable batch of them with the time I had. But without further ado, let's actually get into today's video. Welcome to D20 in Disguise. Firstly, let's cover how I made my actual bases. Now, I personally just made completely circular, basic cardboard bases, but you can do this with actual basing material. You can do this in ovals, square bases, whatever. But if you're going for the cheap route like I am, to show where a beginner starts and kind of the route they take in making these kind of scattered terrain pieces, you can go ahead and use cardboard. Now, to trace a circle in the cardboard, you're just going to want to use a simple compass, and then I would suggest an X-Acto knife. Scissors you can manage with, but there tends to be a curve to a pair of scissors cut, so I would suggest an X-Acto knife or a box cutter. Now that we actually have the starting circular base for our scatter terrain, we can actually begin laying down the groundwork, laying down the soil for these necromantic scatter terrain pieces. Let's get into it. Alright everyone, so let's start by just painting the base paint on here real quick. We're going to use probably a darker tone of gray, and then we're going to add terrain, and try to make the terrain a slightly lighter gray tone painting on after that. Let's do it. Alright, so what I'll be doing next is just taking some normal styrofoam, which you can find around the house, and actually cutting this into some nice terrain with an X-Acto knife, like this one. Now, I prefer styrofoam over, let's say, foamular, because it's a lot easier to get this bulbous, natural, hilly sort of feel, and it's just a lot, it makes very nice looking terrain. Much like this piece here, it has a lot of depth and a lot of texture. So that's what I'm trying to recreate with this normal styrofoam. Let's do it. Remember to sand down the bases of your terrain so they fit neatly on the base of your scatter terrain. Now, all you need to do is simply glue on your terrain onto your base material, wait for that to dry, and then go ahead and paint your terrain with the same base gray tone which you used to actually paint the base, and you're ready to move on to the basic detailing of the base. Also, just a quick tip. Try to make curved edges on your terrain so it goes along with the natural curve of your circular base. as you can see here. I could have made it a rough, curved edge on this larger piece of terrain, which really matches up and is pretty close to the actual edge of the base. So there is some symmetry, there is some parallelism here, so it looks nice and actually kind of symmetrical without people being able to discern how it is symmetrical. It's a nice little trick which I've learned. Alright, so I have all of the base painted, I have the basic terrain added. Actually, I need to clean that up a bit. But pretty much the base paint is all set down. First, we're going to dry brush over this with a slightly lighter tone of gray, and then even more finely dry brush over this with an even lighter, very light tone of gray. And then we'll actually be adding on the base terrain, the base powder, to add that realistic grainy terrain-like feel which you can kind of see here. Anyway, I'm going to let this all dry, and I will see you in just a moment. Alright, so I've just let my base sit out and dry for maybe about, let's say, 30 minutes or so, and I think it's pretty much ready to dry brush. So I'm just going to be using a slightly lighter, just base gray paint, and then just going from there, probably using a stone detailer, which I use as the second dry brushing. Alright, so now that I have the first layer of dry brushing done, we're going to take my stone detailer, just pop this baby open, and start detailing my second and final layer for the base. Alright, so now that we have finished painting the base and dry brushing everything, now we're going to move on to the basic terrain. Now, what I'm using for this is just basic cement powder and some spray glue. And you'll kind of see as I do it, what I like to do. I like to layer on some thicker spray paint. I like to put in quite a bit of PVA into this spray paint. And then layer on the spray paint. Go ahead and sprinkle on the cement dust pretty lightly. You don't want to go thick on this stuff or it will flake. And then go ahead and spray on another layer of your not very watered down PVA on top of the cement powder once more to sandwich it in between two layers of glue. Let's get into it. Alright, so I'm back after about maybe 18 hours of letting this cement powder dry, and it seems as if it's pretty sturdy. Now, what we're going to do next is scrape off all of the loose stuff. So we get a very kind of craggy, lair-ish feel to the actual base terrain, and everything sticks to it. Nothing falls off later on. Also, I do notice that the cardboard base is slightly warped, so we will be fixing that in just a little while after finishing this step. Let's get it done. Alright, so I'm done taking off all of the flaky stuff. I really thinned it out with a scraper quickly. And now all of this excess cement powder, which was flaking off, is completely reusable. So you can go ahead and just take your container which you used to store the cement powder and go ahead and pour it back in. Real easy and simple. Alright, so now we just simply let the paint dry and then start dry brushing after everything is dry. Alright, so now that the paint has mostly dried, it's okay if it's not completely dried because that will actually make it look better when we're blending in the middle gray tone. But once it's mostly dry, you can go ahead and start dry brushing with the middle gray tone. Now I'd say focus less on the flat areas and more on the terrain. Go heavy with the middle gray on the terrain to simulate different levels of altitude and what effects that might have on the terrain itself. Alright, so I'm ready for the second layer of dry brushing. This is what really makes a difference. Try to go especially dry when doing the second layer with a lighter tone of gray than anything which we've used yet. And try to go really light over the entire thing. No discrimination between different areas which you might do more than others. Try and do it all equally as much as any other area in the actual piece. Alright, so now that you've painted and dry brushed the basic texture and got your groundwork laid for all of these necromantic and tainted scatter terrain pieces, now you're going to want to move on to making trees. And trees really add the feel here. Trees are actually made the same exact way, nearly, that I created the swamp scatter terrain trees, and there will be a link to that video in the description and at the end of the video if you want to check it out. I would highly suggest it. Anyway, let's jump into creating tainted and twisted trees for your scatter terrain. So when making these trees, all you're going to start doing is just getting some sticks, one larger central trunk as your trunk, and then going from there just peeling off any of the bark which is pretty loose, as you can see here. If you're going for more of a mismatched kind of aged look, then leave a little bit of the more solid flaking bark on, and you'll get something like this. When painting, I simply duplicated almost the same exact base paint and dry brushing
as the base soil of these pieces. However, I did go a bit darker so there'd be some difference in the tones. For this sap which I created, I originally went with a much lighter and brighter yellow, but then toned down the color with a bit of gray. I did also put a little few dabs of glue on the base and on the ends of the branches and stuck little leaves onto the piece, which really added the Mirkwood feel which I was going for.
So, now that you've fully detailed and designed your trees and glued them onto your base and fully blended them into the terrain, now you're going to want to move on to kind of an optional tool, kind of an optional decoration, but I felt like really matched the feeling which I wanted from these pieces, these ruins and stony remains of some ancient ruins. And you can see these on a few of my pieces. In this one piece, there's almost a full window standing, but not quite. So, let's jump into how I was able to create these old and worn down ruins. To start us off, let me explain what material I actually used to create these little miniature bricks. Now, you might think I might have used pink foamular, and I am hoping to get pink foamular very soon, but for the time being, I simply used an X-Acto knife and cut out little chunks of styrofoam, which actually worked better than I thought it was going to. It didn't flake near as much as I thought, so for all of you frugal creators out there, styrofoam will work.
After getting all of your bricks cut out, all you have to do is simply base paint them with a simple gray, detail with a slightly darker gray, and then arrange them on your piece, gluing them on.
So now that we're done with the bricks, our pieces are completely done. Now I did actually add on another step myself for my pieces which I made, and I wasn't able to include it in the video because I bought them from eBay, and they barely arrived before I'm publishing this video, but I added little miniature skulls to the base, kind of scattered around all over the terrain. More prominent on some pieces than others, but I feel like it really finished off the feel and the theme which I was going for these pieces. Very dismal, very ruined, and very droopy and depressed in that way. Here are some quick pictures of the final product with skulls included. And I think that about does it. I think we've covered how to create tainted scatter terrain pretty darn well, the full process. And I had a lot of fun creating these pieces. They turned out very nice. I feel like the color contrast with the sap and the grays and the blacks was very good. And the leaves really added to that same tone of slight yellow and orange, and it just looked very good. If you enjoyed today's episode of Dismal in Disguise, please hit me up with that like, that subscribe, and if you have any questions for me about the creation of these pieces of scattered terrain, then go ahead and write it down in the comments and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. If you haven't already seen the past 2 episodes of the Miniature Menagerie, I would highly suggest them. Some of my best videos, I cover how to create eerie NPCs and how to create dismal combat encounters. Very good storytelling tips. Anyway, you all have a great day, keep on creating, and I will see you in the next video. And by 10. Yes. 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 And didn't break. Okay, good. Honestly, very good recording session. I think I'll be able to piece this together pretty well. Let's do it.